Okay, welcome to Koga's Weave webinar. The first one we're doing is the Weave Edit extension. My name is Peter James. I'm the Business Development Manager for Koga, and with me is Lucy Minato, our Product Specialist. This is hopefully the first of many webinars that we're going to put on through the course of this year. Some of the topics we've talked about and discussed internally are on the screen there. Tips and tricks, redlining, integration concepts, 3D, and a new feature called Relationships that's come out in the latest release of Weave. We'd also like to get some user experiences up so people can share their experiences and what they're doing with Weave. So if you've got any suggestions for a webinar topic, or if you're interested in sharing your experience with others, please send us a note to say that you would be happy to contribute and participate. That'd be terrific. Today's agenda, I'll briefly introduce you to the Weave Edit extension. Lucy will do a demonstration on how to add and edit spatial and attribute data. We'll discuss how the Weave Edit extension can be used in a practical way, and we'll respond to your questions. I mentioned earlier, if you could keep your questions at this stage to the chat facility, and that'll just avoid everybody bombarding through the meeting itself. So appreciate that. The desktop demonstration by Lucy, that will include some spatial editing, setting the rules and the domains to ensure data integrity, a bit about aspatial editing, and alternatives for the edit user interface. Now, we're going to do this demonstration using the Weave desktop client, and we'll move forward from there. What is the edit extension? Basically, it provides a means to edit geometry and attributes, including related and standalone tables. It's a module that can be licensed from Koga to extend the capabilities of a Weave solution. So if you have Weave, you can actually get this as an extension to your current Weave license. And it can be configured to manage points, lines, polygons, including multi-part features. So, you might have 2 or 3 polygons per polygon, if you like. It's a simple but powerful browser-based editor that works with and complements the Weave capabilities. The key point there is it's a browser-based editor. It's not a application, not in the traditional sense of an application. And it provides the data management capabilities across an organization using existing Weave servers and clients. The core capabilities of the edit extension, basically it enables end users to add, edit, and delete records in their corporate and spatial database systems. It's pretty simple setup for basic operations. It can be configured for advanced operations, like most aspects of Weave. It can be configured to do a variety of tasks, both simple and very, very complicated tasks. I've just heard someone else join the lobby, so I'll step out of here for a second and add David in and go back to the presentation. Spatial data entry, that can be done by a variety of ways. You can use the mouse, coordinate entry, file upload, or you can transfer from another entity. So quite versatile. In terms of adding spatial entities, they can also be snapped to other features as they're created or updated, which is a very powerful aspect of the spatial edit tool. From a data entry attribute perspective, information can be added manually. We can default with auto values. We have drop-down lists. We can transfer from other entities. We've got a whole bunch of widgets that are set up so you can automatically validate information as they're entered through calendar and time widgets, checkboxes. And we also have a one-to-many edit capability along with an audit trail so you can capture any changes that are made to the system. Some of the basic benefits: continuous improvement. It extends the existing weed solution for very little cost or effort. You get better user engagement, greater, broader user base with useful editing capabilities. You can improve your user satisfaction by allowing the users to be more responsible for their data. Broaden the user base. You can provide that capability to both internal and external clients. And it's very cost effective. There's no limit on the number of clients who can use this edit extension. So you're not buying a license for one person, you're buying a license for a server. And it does run on both desktop and mobile clients, so you're getting a better accessibility for your clients. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Lucy, who's going to do the desktop demonstration.
So welcome everybody. I know some of you are already using the Weave edit extension, so you may already know of the capabilities and be using them already. But hopefully this morning you will learn about some new capabilities or how you can extend what you're currently already using. And we'll have time for questions at the end. Just quickly, the data that I'm using here was provided as sample data from Manningham City Council a number of years ago, so thanks to them for that. The data has been edited a lot since then, so don't take anything you see today as a representation of the data they're doing. I thought I'd start off today by showing you some just some basic editing of different geometry types, points, lines, and polygons. I'm not going to be able to show you all the editing across all those geometries, so just keep in mind when I show you something on a, sorry, can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's all good, Lucy.
Sorry about that. It just my earphones went a bit different, and I thought suddenly I was just talking to myself. What I'll do is when I show you an editing capability, just keep in mind that it will apply to all geometry types. In order to make the demo a little bit simpler, I've actually created just some sample layers, and I've just called them sample, point, line, and polygon to remind myself what the geometry type is of each of those. The thing to keep in mind with all Weave editing for spatial data is it works on one feature at a time. So you have to have only one feature selected before any editing will work. We'll start off with something simple. We're just going to start off with points. And what I've chosen to do is, so we've got an editing panel for spatial data. I've chosen to put it on the right-hand side over here. Like with most other panels in Weave, you can put it wherever you like. I've put it here so that I can actually have access to the other panels while still having my edit panel open. Also, these names are just the names that I've put in because you can see I've got lots of different edit panels just to be able to differentiate. So the first thing you have to do to be able to edit is to actually set the active layer. So firstly, we're going to work on the point layer. Now, as soon as I make that active, you can see this is the edit configuration that I've set up for my sample points. There are a number of things you can do, or editing operations: creating, editing, or deleting. Now, these can be set up at the panel level. So if you decide that you don't want editors to be able to delete any data, you can actually disable the edit option, so they would never be able to delete any of the data. What we've been able to do in the past is actually set that for the panel, but what's just come out, we just did a release yesterday, you can actually set this per edit. And what I mean by that is, let's say for the sample point layer, you wanted people to be able to delete entries, but then not for the other layers. You can actually configure that. So, and that hasn't been possible. It's just come out with the latest release. So let's actually add some data so you can actually see it in operation. So when you just start by creating a new point. Once you've created the geometry, you can then enter whatever attributes you like. Mine are just put in here, obviously, to demonstrate to you what you can add. I've tried to use lists as much as possible, and you can use these as much as possible to aid in your data entry, and so you get, better data from your users. So you can see the first attribute's a list. The other thing you can do is you can actually add guiding text. So you can see for this cost value, I've put in some text here, and that's to help, we'll give the user a bit of a guide as to what they should be typing in. That disappears once you've typed in a value. The other thing you can do is you can set some domains or rules, and what these do is guide the users, will actually stop the users from entering data that's not valid. So in this case, I've set a rule because I only want the value of cost to be below a certain value. And you can see here, because this is invalid, if you hover over the red exclamation mark, it'll tell the user what the maximum value for that field is, which was 1,000. So if I remove one of those, you can see that the user now knows that's the valid data entry. As Peter mentioned, we have certain widgets. So if you want to record a date for something, you can set it up as a date parameter, and the user gets to choose a date. You can also set something up as a time parameter. So what that means is you get a list of times. You don't have to type this out or create a list. It just sets it up itself. And what you do is specify what time increment you want. So as you can see here, I've set a time increment of 10 minutes, so it gives me the option for every 10 minutes. I've done that, I submit, and that's, I've now got my point. Just a little bit. So Peter mentioned we can have snapping. So, and you can set this up obviously before you start editing. And the snapping is very similar to the snapping that you would have seen in the redlining toolbar. So anyone who's used redlining and who's used the snapping in settings here, the Weave Edit extension uses pretty much the same thing. So let's quickly just show you how that works. You enable the snapping. So let's just exaggerate this a bit so we can actually see. Let's snap to property boundaries. I turn the snapping on. Now, once again, I need to have a feature selected. So I've got my point selected there. This time I'm going to edit the selected feature. I can change the attributes if I want, but what I really want to show you is that I can now drag that, and you should hopefully see that it's snapping to a point. Saved it to the database. So as I said, that snapping operation of the parameters there are the same ones as you get with redlining. And as you can see, it's pretty extensive, and it's the same as what you'd get with a full-blown desktop GIS software.
Lucy, just to interrupt for a second, Rob's struggling to see the data entry panel on the right. I'm just wondering if others are having the same issue, you might want to try zooming out with your web browser control. Oh, hang on, he's just said he sees the panel, but no entries. Okay, Rob, did you see the panel on the right that Lucy was just showing with the snapping information? You can unmute for that if you like. Jim's okay, he can see all the details. So it seems like we're okay, Lucy. And Mark's fine. Okay, no issues. We'll continue. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so that's showing you how to do some data entry just with simple graphical placement of points. Let's change now and let's add some lines. But this time what I want to do is, instead of adding lines by graphically clicking on the map, I want to add lines by coordinate entry. Let's go to a different location. So now I've got my new edit specifically for lines. This time when I create a new feature, I could start clicking here in the map. You'll see that the cursor's got that orange dot, but I don't want to. What I actually want to do is create the geometry from text coordinates. You have a new menu that pops up. It's pretty extensive in terms of the parameters you can set for setting your or defining the coordinates. I won't go through all of those. You can have choose what projection you want as well. And you can see there are various options available for how you specify the coordinates. So it's quite covers quite a number of options in terms of how you define them. It does also let you define them by WKT and GeoJSON. But let's just do something simple this morning. Here's some coordinates someone's provided. I'll just move this over. When I click finish, you should see that it's drawn that line at those coordinates that I gave. Let's just choose, put in some attributes as well, submit that, and now I've just got my data that's been added. So whenever you want to, let's say we wanted to edit that line location now, we have to select it. Once again, when you edit, there's different ways. Let's say I wanted to edit the spatial information about that feature. I click in edit mode, and those of you who have used redlining will notice this similar set out, because this is how redlining works as well. Creates a vertex, and to change the geometry, you just start clicking define a vertex. That's how you do the graphical changing of your feature. But let's cancel that. I don't want to save those changes. So every time a user will get asked this before they any changes get saved to the database. Because we actually added this by coordinates, let's say we want to change it by editing the coordinates as well. We go into edit mode. This time we'll use the update button. You'll see it's a similar menu to what it was before, and it's providing us the coordinates of what you can see on the screen. So let's just, offset, change the northing of this by 50 meters. So note that's our original line. If we say finish, what it's now done is it's moved the line over here. So the highlighted one is what I had originally. The red line is the one I'm moving to. If I submit that, that will now be my new line that's added. So that's covered how you do data entry by digitizing on the map or by specifying coordinates. The other way you might want to add some data is by copying geometry from an existing layer. As we all know, we don't want to be redigitizing something. It's far better to copy if we've already got the geometry there. So in order to do that, we'll grab a polygon. So we're now going to be editing polygons. just to show you the polygons should be shown in a crosshatch like this. But what I want to do now is actually copy this property here, copy the geometry from the property layer and put it into my sample polygon layer. So the first thing I have to do is go to my property layer and select that particular geometry. I now go back to my sample polygon layer and I'm going to create a new entity. We'll come back to those in a minute. And I choose this button, which is importing from another entity. So it then presents you with the layers that have a selection. So I've already selected a property polygon. So I'm now saying copy that selected property polygon into my current editable layer. So now you'll see it's copied the geometry because I can see that in red. You'll notice that the submit button here is ghosted because what I've done here is I've set some fields to be mandatory. So in your edit, you can set up fields to be mandatory. So if I hold my mouse, if I hover my mouse, it says this field is required. So I need to actually select something here before I'm able to submit. Once I submit that, there I've got my polygon that's been copied from my property layer. So that also showed you how you can set parameters to be mandatory. And if they are mandatory, the user won't be able to submit anything until they've actually filled those values in. So just quickly, I'll show you just a little bit more on editing. I'm going to just use a simple example here of perhaps something that's a bit more realistic. Let's go to some council trees. So here I've got representations for council street trees. And let's do some spatial editing of those. So once again, you have to the first thing to do is to make them active and then select some. Now you notice if I select more than one, my edit panel is not available. So I have to select one only and then things become available. So it won't allow you to edit more than one. The reason why I wanted to show you this edit panel, let's say we try, is because it actually shows you a few other things you can set up when you want to edit. Actually, let's unselect that one and let's create a new, let's say we want to put in a new tree there. In order to try and make the editing a bit more interesting, what you can do here is group certain parameters. So put a border around them and also give them a heading. And that might help to sort of, especially if you've got a number of parameters that are collected, it might help to make it look a bit nicer. The other thing you can do is, let's say we add in a number here. You notice that here in the FID, it's not something that can be edited. So once we've got an ID there, it will display, but it's not an editable field. You can also set up a parameter as a checkbox. So here I've got a parameter showing if there's a power line near a tree. I could have just had a yes, no drop down, but instead I'm making it as a checkbox just to make it a bit more interesting to the user. They want to set a tree species. I've got an extensive list. Now this is coming from the data itself. You can set up lists, and these lists that you use for editing, they're the same as the lists set up in a similar way, the same way I should say, as you use a list in a search. So you can have lists where a user can add their own entries or they must choose from what's already existing. So I can choose a species. let me jump to hazard. So with a hazard related to a tree, I've actually set this up as a lookup table. So you can use lookup tables for your data. And the reason I've done that is I'll quickly just show you what the data looks like. So this is the data, the street tree data from my database. Now, if I go across, you'll see that the hazard column is actually a number. But I didn't want to present that to the user because the number doesn't mean anything to them. They won't know which one's high, medium, extreme. So what I've done instead is set up a lookup table. So here's my lookup table with my numeric value together with a rating. And then I can make use of this lookup table so that the user's getting a meaningful list. But when something's written to the database, it's actually written the number corresponding with each of these values. I have another drop-down list here for height. Now, because this has been the way the values are written in the database, they're characters, so you can see by default what Weave does is it sorts it alphabetically. So one thing I could do to improve this setup is to actually create this as a lookup table or some kind of static list, so I can actually order these in a way that makes more sense to the users, have them in numeric order. But that shows you some of the different ways you can actually set up your edit entries.
Lucy, just a quick question from Kim. He's asking, where is the data stored? What she is. And do you have to create a separate data store on the server?
So the data can be stored anywhere where you're, I mean, like anything with Weave, as long as Weave can connect to it. So in this case, I've got my data in a PostGIS database, but you could have anything as long as Weave can connect to it, and as long as you know, the Weave user has access to write to that database. Sorry, does that answer your question, Kim?
Yep.
Yeah. So you would need to create, you know, the same way as when you set up a data definition and you need to tell it, you need to set up your data source. You could either have an existing data source or you could create a new data source. All right, so that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover as far as spatial editing goes. So I'll quickly just talk a little bit about the aspatial side.
Before you do that, Lucy, Kim's come back with another question. Can you control who has permission to edit data and which data sets?
Definitely. So you can set up ACLs on the edit panel itself, so that would control who sees it, as well as on the actual edit operations. So yes, I guess that's the answer to your question.
Yes, indeed.
Yep. And I just keep that in mind, that the things that apply to other parts of Weave, like you can set up, you know, control who sees what searches, although you probably don't, but you can do the same thing for edit. So you can set up control at the panel level or at the edit level. Okay. All right. So I might just go on to aspatial editing now, and then we can come back if anyone's got any other general questions. Excuse me. So with the aspatial editing, there are three types of editing. Excuse me. Let me just... Three types of editing. You can edit standalone tables, related tables, and entity tables. So let's start off with the easiest first, standalone tables. So these are tables that are not linked to any entities. So it's just as if the user was going into the database and editing the data itself. So they would have the ability to create, update, or delete records. And this could be used to edit lookup tables, or also to actually edit a table that has no spatial part at all. And because of this, the data is presented to the user as a grid. And I guess put simply, Weave will let you edit a table as long as you've set up a connection and as long as Weave can connect to that table. Now, I've chosen to put that edit panel in the center, because this editing has nothing to do with anything on the map. It's completely separate. Even though here you may see data that looks like plan numbers and could be related to something on the map, it's not in this environment. So you've got to consider this as just editing a standalone table. Once again, you have the options to create, update, and delete, and you can decide what level of control is applied. If I click on one of these, you'll see that the other options become available. Once again, if you didn't want if you didn't want anyone to delete, but you just wanted to update the records, you could disable that delete option. And to update, you just click on an entry and then start typing in there. Once again, to try and get data integrity, you can use lists. So try and use lists as much as possible. This data grid here that you're seeing, it's pretty much like the data grid you see to view attributes. Excuse me. So you can set the same kind of parameters. You can set the default of how many records can be seen at the one time. Because in this standalone table editing, the user is presented with all of the records at once. If you've got a lot of records, it could be difficult for them. So you can use the filtering to try and narrow down, to narrow down the list of records presented. So in this case, let's look if we wanted to edit things that were RP145. We can use this filter to bring us just the records that we may want to edit. Double click and then go into edit mode. So that's the first type. That's the standalone tables. So let's go to the second type now, which is related tables. Related tables are tables where an entity has a one-to-many relationship. So you think of it as one spatial feature related to many records in a table. And I'm sure you've all got your own examples of where you have this type of relationship. So in this case, for a related table, it's going to be linked to an active layer and something that you've selected. So for this example, let's go to our property data set. And we use a different editing panel this time. Once again, you can call these whatever you like. I've changed the name so I know which edit panel controls which thing. So let's actually do a search and find a property that I know has some data in a related table. Go back to my related table, related edit. And now you'll see that, actually, maybe I should just turn these off so you don't get confused. Okay, so this is one property that has multiple records in a related table. And just to prove there is that relationship, if I selected another property here, you'll notice that in this edit panel, there's nothing there because this property has no related records in the other table. I can keep going. When I click to here, it shows me, okay, you've got one property, it's linked to whatever that is, 7 records in another table. I want to edit these. Once again, you can just edit and save that. And you could have had this panel up here in the center. Once again, I like to have it here because it's actually related to a spatial feature, something you see on the map. In the latest release of Weave, there's a slight variation on this type of editing. It's called the combined editor for related tables. And what that means is, as well as having one spatial record list linked to multiple entries in your aspatial table, when you click on one of those, you can edit them. You can edit that here. So you actually can see all the related records while you're editing. So that's just a new feature that came out yesterday. That's called the combined editor for related tables. So the last type of editing we'll cover is called entity table. And this is tables where you have are related to an entity on a one-to-one relationship. So that's where we have one spatial feature related to one record in another table. And you could just edit those through the spatial editor if you wanted to. But I guess an example of where you do this is, let's say you had collected all the spatial data and you wanted someone to do editing of just the attributes. You could set it up using an entity table edit, so they don't even get the option to edit the spatial data. So let me quickly demonstrate that. Let's go back to my trees example. I've just got a different symbology now. I've actually, I'm symbolizing the trees based on the, sorry, there's a bit of a typo there, whether there's a power line nearby. So we've got the yes and no values. So I'll select a tree. Oops. I need to set mine. Active layer, select one. Now I'm going to go to my, what I'm calling my non-spatial edit. And now what this is doing is I've set up this edit. So I only want the user to edit one thing, and that is tell me, update the power line attribute. And you can see this could be useful if you had spatial features and you wanted someone just to update the condition information, for example. So you have a look at this symbology. So this is currently the light color, which is telling us there's no power line nearby. The user does their edit, so they tick the checkbox, submit it. You have to refresh the map, but that should now change the symbology there. And it updates the attributes as well. So this is an example of an edit that you would set up where people are just updating the attributes related to a spatial feature. Okay, now I can see I've probably talked for way too long already. I'm just going to quickly show one more thing and then I'll open it up to questions. And that is, I just wanted to show you that there are alternative ways to set up your Weave editing user interface. And this is probably especially the case if you wanted to set up a Weave editing environment that just had a few options for someone who was just doing editing. And what I've done here is I've created a little menu called Creating, very original, and I've set it up so that I can quickly go to the editing setup for a sample point line or polygon. And the reason I've done this is because when you're going to edit something, as you saw before, we had to do a number of things. One was we had to change the active layer, we had to go to the edit panel, and then we actually had to start editing. But what you can do is you can actually set that up to all happen at the one time. So let's see if this works. We'll do the create sample polygon. We'll choose that one. So what you'll notice is that the active layer should change, hopefully. Yep. So I think what's happened is the active layers changed to sample poly, and I'm already in edit mode, so I can already start to add a polygon. You can also, just to prove that it works, in this case, I've created one button and I've hard-coded that button to go into, to create a sample polygon. And actually what it should do is, if I click on that, you see it's done three things. It's set the active layer, it's actually made the spatial editing panel be available, as well as automatically put me into edit mode. Now, I wanted to show you this, but I say do treat it with, use it with care, and there's only certain situations where I think it should be used because it puts the user into edit mode. You see, I'm now in edit mode, and even though they can press other things, they really need to cancel that operation to get out of it. So I would, for me, these would be useful if you wanted to create a simple Weave interface that had a few buttons to create certain types of features. Okay, I've probably definitely spoken enough now, so I'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. That's very good. I think that has quite clearly demonstrated the capabilities of the edit function, both spatially and attribute edits. Like all things Weave, it can be configured to do exactly what you want. So think about how you would use this. We're open for questions. If you want to type them into the chat session, we can certainly answer them. What I might do whilst the chat is being hopefully populated with questions, I will slip back to sharing my PowerPoint screen. And we should be seeing that now. Is that back up now, Lucy?
Yep, thanks, Peter.
Okay, so while you think about the questions, I'll just run through a couple of quick slides to finish off the actual presentation. So just a practical application, some thoughts I put down for how you'd use the Weave edit extension. For obviously recording and managing in the field, for example, public concern, graffiti, potholes, those sorts of things. As Lucy was demonstrating, the urban forest is a classic example of how you would add, edit, and update your urban forest. All your council assets. In the Northern Territory, they're using it for active fires and fire scars and mapping natural features like vegetation. It can also be used, obviously, in a planning context. In the office, you can build your planning zones with it, put in proposed building footprints, update and amend address and personal information, those sorts of applications, which may, in the past, have meant people have to apply through another system or a paper-based system. You can now make this accessible directly through the Weave browser. Just an implementation scenario that I thought of, and there are hundreds of these, but just as a suggestion, you could create a set of working layers that staff have edit access to. That could either be a common set of layers for all staff, or maybe a separate workspace for each staff member. And then staff basically have the capability to edit that working layer and submit it for approval. The administrator can then, once it's been submitted, can review that information, quality assure it, make sure that the edits are accurate, and then publish those edits to the production system. So, you know, a typical scenario that you'd expect with any data being entered and managed in a system. And you can build those workflows and work processes into the Weave edit extension. I will now throw it open to the chat. Hopefully there's some questions down there. There aren't at the moment. Look, what I might do is anybody that has a question that don't want to type it in, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and just fire away. I think that might be as good as typing in the chat session. I'm hopeful that there are some questions, so please fire away. Okay, so Neil has asked the question, is there provision for attaching and storing things like photos in a field edit scenario?
Actually, sorry, Neil. So can you clarify, are you talking about something used in the office or in the field?
Yeah, so we're looking to use it for things like fire hazard inspections at the start of fire season. And the guys are required to take pictures of anything they find that are then loaded into our document management system.
Yep.
So yeah, we're trying to replicate that kind of thing rather than taking out a hard copy or an Excel spreadsheet and then having to match everything up when they get back to the office.
With the Weave desktop client, any documents, including photos and videos, can be uploaded during the data edit. Similarly, with the mobile client, photos and videos can be taken and uploaded during the data edit. Documents are managed and retrieved using the Weave document management system. David says, hi, we're using the editor for our tree data, and one of the issues we had was with respect to the ArcGIS object ID not being synchronized with the IDs created by Weave. Has this been addressed? David, has that stopped you from using the editor at all, or is it just an inconvenience?
Hi, Peter. No, it doesn't stop us at all. It just means that we have to, I mean, the majority of our users use the Weave editor. Actually, they prefer the Weave editor for their editing the tree data. It just means that if you've got somebody who is also editing the data in ArcGIS, you need to be careful because you'll start to get. Now, I seem to recall that it may have been addressed, so I guess I was really just after clarification. But we were having issues earlier on where we're having some users were using the ArcGIS desktop and we had other users using the Weave editor, and there was this, the synchronization was being lost. So yeah, I was just after some clarification whether that had been confirmed.
Right.
Thanks.
No worries. We'll definitely respond to you in a formal way to that.
Sounds like GT's already responded. Thanks, Gray.
Oh, there we go. Okay, any more questions at this stage? We're coming up close to the hour, which I appreciate. You're all very busy, and appreciate your time, sharing your time with us today. As I mentioned, this is our first Weave webinar. It's the first of many, so please stay tuned. We will be sending out invitations to future webinars. I'd like your input. As I mentioned earlier, please send us anything you've got in mind for a webinar, or if you want to participate through some sort of sharing of your experience and with what you're doing with Weave. It doesn't have to be with the edit extension by any stretch. It could be fundamentally anything. In a council sense, you might want to showcase what you're doing with planning, for example, and we'd be very happy to put your showcase your scenario on a webinar. All right, then, I think that probably will wrap it up. I appreciate your time once again. Lucy, any final comments before we sign off?
No, that's it. Thanks very much for everyone who's attended. And yeah, we look forward to getting your other questions about weave editing if you have any. Thanks.
Yeah, and this has been recorded, as I mentioned at the start. So if you want to recap and revise what was done and said, please look for it on the Weave website. The Koga website. That'll be up shortly.
Sorry, Peter, I do have one more thing that just came into mind. The last couple of releases of Weave have made a number of improvements for Weave editing. So if there is anyone who's interested in it, it's worth also doing an upgrade, because the latest release will include everything I've demonstrated, and the last few releases have added a lot more functionality or made it a lot more extensive in terms of what you can do. So it's definitely worth considering an upgrade if you want to start using Weave editing extension.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Lucy. Alrighty, on that note, let's up stumps. Thanks once again, everybody, and we'll see you at the next Weave webinar. Cheerio now.